Welcome back. Today we are going back to the 356 and assembling the steering box. I got all the seals I needed and everything I should have to get it assembled, set up correctly, painted, and hopefully installed in the car. Fingers crossed.
Garage time.
My strategy has been to disassemble 3 steering boxes, pick the best parts for myself, and then have some spares for later on. Okay, right here I'm putting in the tapered needle bearings in where the peg goes. These are tapered, so you have to put the thick end out and then carefully slide the peg in without knocking them out. I'm clamping down on the locking tabs. That allows me to put some preload on these bearings to make sure that it's play free. Right now I'm just loosening it up a little bit and then checking the rotation, make sure it's smooth without any play. I cleaned these pretty well just with my wire wheel on the bench grinder. This one came pretty clean. This one has a couple, nooks and crannies in it. So I'm gonna use some cheap paint stripper. This is the sort of environmentally friendly stuff that we get now. I found that this stuff works best if you just pour it on and leave it alone. The more you mess with it and brush it around, the least effective it is. Yeah, I think it did something. Okay, I think I loosened it up. I'm gonna put it in the ultrasonic cleaner and that should take care of all the rest of the paint. It should come off really quick. This is a very mild solution of super clean. So it's not like a super harmful chemical that I'm gonna not put my hands in. But I'm gonna have to rotate this a few times, it looks like. So all the grease and all the paint is mostly gone. The only thing that's left is a little bit of the brown sort of rust discoloration, but it's really not bad. It's only in a few spots that the wire wheel couldn't get. This is the sealing surface on this side, and then there's another sealing surface right here. They look pretty good. There's one pretty strong gouge right there. I'm not gonna worry too much about it. It's gonna get some gasket kind of sealant on there. But I am gonna just go over it with a really fine file, make sure there's no burrs or sharp edges to prevent a nice seal. I got both surfaces here cleaned and filed flat, so I'm just checking to see if there's any daylight between the surfaces or any rocking feeling. It doesn't feel like it's rocking at all. Even if I put it on backwards, I don't feel any rocking, so I think we got this nice and flat. Finally, it's time to do the assembly. Working on an old car is like 90% just cleaning parts. This is the bearing that I kept track of. I know that this bearing is the one that falls out from right here. This one goes right down in there like that. The box gets filled with oil, but it's still a good idea to just pack the moving parts with grease too. Then the worm gear goes in like so. And it rides on that bearing just like that. And then the next bearing, which I had bagged separately, I've already packed this one. This one goes in this direction. taper pointing up, and then this is the race for that bearing, and it goes taper pointing down. I'll just work that in there. You might need a hammer. Got a ways to go on this one. There we go. You can see how they rotate. Nice and smooth. The next is a spacer. This spacer had a little bit of sealant on there, so I took it to my bench grinder and cleaned off any of the junk on there. And then the cover plate. This cover plate has one shim that's permanently attached to it. I couldn't get it off. So I just cleaned it and left it on. It's sealed really well. With those cinched down just a little bit, we can turn the gear and I can feel it smooth, but it's getting a little tight. My hand's got a lot of grease on them, but it's a little too tight as it rotates. And so I would prefer to have a little bit more freedom to it. Remember, there's no seal on this end, so sometimes a tight seal can give you a bad feel. That's why I didn't put the seal in yet. But it'll go all the way around 360 degrees. However, it is pretty tight. Any play in this direction will be felt when you drive down the road. So we want this to have zero play, but also not too tight. That's just kind of a thing of feel. So let's put another shim in. I have two shims here left over. This one's slightly thicker, so I'm going to start with this one. Make sure there's no more sealant, any junk on there. Lay that in there. Not over tightening here, just cinching it down. Really light pressure. And it feels looser. Not bad at all. Still a fair amount of torque though. Let me torque these down just a little more and see how that changes it, because I might. That's back to really tight again. So let's put the last shim in. Oh yeah. That really did the trick. And these are the same bearings, same shims I took out of here. So that's in agreement. This feels really nice. Easy to spin. I mean, you can't just freewheel it. It's not like it's really loose, but if you were to try to measure any kind of play in and out, you cannot move it in and out. There's no play in and out whatsoever. And then this is where the seal goes to make sure it's nice and clean. This is the brand new seal. Make sure we have a block of wood here to drive this in nice and flat. Put a little grease on the seal. There are some splines on the shaft, and we just want to make sure there's no sharp edges, nothing going to grab the seal and tear it. Start with this guy on this side. Sometimes this lower bearing can get cocked sideways. There we go. I'm going to use something called Hylomar. It is a never hardens impervious to fuel gasket maker and thread sealant. We don't want to change the thickness. So we'll torque this down right away, but this is real light, so it's not going to change the preload in the bearings. I don't think we need to use any sealant on the threads because these holes are blind holes. They don't go all the way through. So next up is the shaft that goes through here. And this is the guy that I already worked on with these needle bearings. Now, the one thing I do still want to do, I ended up reusing this star washer, or the lock tabs, but I used the tabs that weren't previously bent because the way it lined up with the nut, I didn't need to use it. However, the ones that were used are partially bent back. I'm just going to go ahead and break those off. I don't think they would ever break on their own, but I don't want them to come loose and get stuck in my steering gear. There's two ears removed. Make sure they go in the trash and not inside my steering box. The preload on this has already been established and measured and it feels really nice, about the same amount of drag as the shaft right here. So that's good to go in. It's okay at this point to put this seal in now because it doesn't affect any more preload. All the preload on this shaft is adjustable with the cover. Got that screw right here. This cover is how you adjust it externally. I like to use a big board, make sure it's nice and flat. Now this shaft has a sharp corner right here. So this will damage the seal if you're not careful. I think I'm going to try to put some tape on that, but I don't know if it'll go through the bearings if I put tape on it. So at least put some grease on it. Grease this whole shaft. This one gets a special spherical washer that kind of mates up to that radius right there. This one mates up there. Here is a spring. And then there are two washers on the top, and that's how I took it apart. There's first a thick one and then a thin one. So double check, yeah, thick and then thin. Now I think we can try to slide this in. And this is the part that makes me nervous, right here. I think it's also important to line up the marks on the gears. So let's see, right there is a mark. We want that one to be lined up. And we want this one to be here in the center. There's no way I could have had any tape on that in order to prevent that from cutting the seal. So we're just going to have to hope for the best. On this side, there's just one kind of heavy nick in the housing, so I'm just going to put a little bit right there. One of these bolts is longer than the other, and I'm gonna have to go back and look at my first video to see which one is the longer. I know that it's got a hole in it, and that's where that little identifier tag was. It's probably either this one or this one, but I'll go back and double check real quick. Some of that's gonna be on the inside as well, but because it's just a oil bath inside there, it's not going to interfere with anything. It should be fine. Okay, I just verified this is supposed to have the tall bolt, so let's swap that out. Okay, I'm doing 25 foot-pounds on these guys. Uh, 10 foot-pounds on these guys. Now, this has a line on it as well as the shaft. So I remember making note of that when I took this apart. These line up, that denotes the center of the steering. This mark lined up with this one. Let me see. This one's lined up here, everything's turning. So that's lined up, and this is lined up. Okay, that's full left. I put this on here so I can kind of pay attention. That lines up with this stud. And then that's full right. So we got one turn, two turns. It's about 2 3/4 turns from lock to lock. Yeah, 1.375 turns is going to be the center. So if I go from this position, I'm going to go 1, and then a little bit less than half. And that should be right where the center is. That does line up right here. And then let's try to find that tight spot. It should be right there, right when it's lined up. So let's go ahead and line it up. And then I'm going to come in here with the screwdriver and just put a little tension on it. Okay, now I can feel the tight spot right there. It's loose, tight, loose. Now, in the workshop manual, I did read about this tight spot, and it does give you a torque setting for determining how tight that thing should be. It's super sensitive to this screwdriver position. Okay, here's my, my torque wrench. This is an inch-pound torque wrench, and it has, settings all the way from like that right there. This is 0, locks in, and then it goes to 2, 4, and that's 6. I think 6 is the max torque, it said. And because there's no easy way to attach it here, but it's the same torque whether it's applied off the center or not. As I'm turning it here, it's actuating the steering. And then here's the center part, and that's 6 inch-pounds right there. So it is too tight. I'm going to go up to 10. Okay, so it turns at 10. Okay, that was a minor adjustment. Let's see what that does to the torque. So now it's too loose. I can feel the center, but it's probably like 2. Doesn't go through. So that's about the right amount of tension, and it's pretty close to what I had just based on feel. You can feel the tight spot right there. I don't think you're going to be able to feel that in the steering wheel, but time will tell. Pointer goes right here. All right, that pointer's adjusted and pointing to the right place. That does correspond with the tight spot. So I think that's just helpful if you're working under the car, you're doing alignment. You have to make sure when you're setting the toe in that this is pointing right at that mark. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and paint this as is, but this lock tab needs to be replaced. I don't have a new one for this. I forgot to order it. So I'm going to keep it assembled. I'm going to paint it as is, but I'm going to put a piece of tape on this as soon as I'm done to remind myself this has not been torqued. These lock tabs are like so. And then we got this giant nut here to torque. Okay, I got the bigger torque wrench. This is 112 foot-pounds. I wouldn't trust this to a impact wrench. There we go. Okay, at this point, it's all sealed up. Now it's just a matter of a little bit of degreaser and wax and grease remover so we can get this thing painted and on the car. This is really clean now. Most of it is not coming off on the towel. Gone through like 3 or 4 cycles of wax and grease remover. I'm also going to try to mask the seal just a little bit. Okay, I just zip tied some of this plastic vacuum tubing around the shaft so it prevents the seal from getting painted. It's not perfect, but that's what I did for that one. Same idea on this one, but instead of using the vacuum tubing, I just used a piece of electrical wire, sandwiched it in between the pointer and the housing. This thing is now dry enough to at least touch. Now it says to put a 1/4 of a liter in here of gear oil. And so I worked it out, that is actually 1 cup. So this is not from the kitchen, this is marked garage. That should be tight enough. All right, first fluids are in the car. Okay, the last little thing to do here is I have this ZF tag. This is for the warranty seal or whatever. This is clearly out of warranty. So I'm just gonna put this back in here and kind of loop it around and maybe solder the end of it back on. This is a nice to have, certainly fun to do. I have one of each of these clamps that attach the steering box to the torsion tube. And I've done a little more research. I've seen it both ways. I've seen them black. I've seen them raw aluminum. But I'm going to go raw aluminum with the plated nuts showing. There is a peg right here that belongs to a hole in the torsion tube. So I need to go under the car, make sure that hole isn't filled up with paint. Looks like the hole that pin needs to go in. Just gotta figure out how to get this thing in here. But it's interfering right there. It's a little bit of a tight fit. I don't know how to get it below that without sort of forcing it in. There we go. So now I just got to take that piece of wood out and then slide the box over. There it is, right there. Perfect. Now it's holding itself in place, and go underneath and clamp it up. I didn't torque the clamping bolts down. I want to make sure that seal doesn't leak, and fingers crossed. See you next week.